Joe, that was so good.
We are live on YouTube.
All right, welcome everybody to the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. We are here with Secretary Julie Moore of ANR for testimony that I've really been looking forward to. I think it's going to be great. We're going to talk about climate investments in Vermont. So we'll quickly introduce ourselves around the table. We'll go around the room and then we'll turn it over to you, Secretary Moore. I am Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Richard Bailey, Memorial 2.
Chris Morrow, Wisdom, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Jared Torrey, Washington 2.
Fran Plutner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Laura Civilian, Wyndham 2.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Great. And in the room.
Melissa Bailey, Public Service Department.
Great.
Jamie Zorchek, Agency of Natural Resources.
Andrea Wright, Agency of Transportation.
Matt Coda, Mental Health.
Becky Wig, Berry City.
Matt Sorensen, Game Legislative Intern, Representative Hanga.
Great. And Representative Scott Campbell is joining us online. And for the record, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Julie Moore, I'm the Secretary of Natural Resources. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this morning. Get my screen shared. Hopefully it'll go full screen for you all too. Perfect. So thought I could provide kind of a high level overview of current climate investments in Vermont, and some of the opportunities and challenges I see that lie ahead in terms of maintaining what we currently have going on, which is quite a bit. And just have asked that relevant experts from public service, transportation, and our climate office join me, and they'll be here to help answer questions as we go along. Because I am about an inch deep and a mile wide right now. So hoping to talk through kind of key areas of climate work, which I would lump into these three buckets, provide some high level information around current funding, and then dive into a couple of sector specific examples, and then end with a set of comments on what I see lies ahead. So starting with the key areas of climate work. This information that I'm presenting is not exclusively, but largely drawn from the climate spending report that the Climate Action Office prepares in service of the Climate Council's annual report to the legislature. And so happy to circulate those links if it would be helpful to the committee, but just know that there is a comprehensive set of spreadsheet that underlies a lot of what I'm presenting here today.
We would definitely like to see that.
Send that to Jack Creighton.
Great, thanks. Get it posted and sent to the committee, please. That'd be great.
Yep.
Thanks, Jane. So, first up, just looking at how the different ways we are making the investments. In FY25, we were able to document a remarkable more than $500 million worth of money that's been either appropriated or spending has been authorized in what I would call the climate space. I would say this is a really good accounting of those dollars. It is not exhaustive. And in fact, as I was working on the presentation, identified a couple of things that I think probably rightly should be counted in this space. So it's a body of work that's growing over time. But you can see of that spending, about 2/3 goes into things we would call mitigation. So reducing greenhouse gases. And that's stuff like weatherization, electric service panel upgrades, helping homeowners transition to heat pumps or modern wood heat, electric vehicle incentives and charging infrastructure all sit in that box. In addition, there are significant investments being made in adaptation and resilience. This includes things like targeted buyouts that are largely being funded through FEMA, wetland and floodplain restoration work, as well as infrastructure improvements. And Andrea and I were actually chatting in the hall before this and noted that what isn't reflected in some of these resilience and adaptation work is kind of the sum total of infrastructure investments in bridges and culverts that's being made consistent with Vermont's codes and standards that are sort of flood ready. I wouldn't call them flood proof, but they are designed and intended to be able to pass the majority of storm flows we are seeing now.
Just a quick question. So, on your donut chart, sorry, I don't know what that's called.
Yep.
Pie chart. with a hole in the middle. Is that, the sequestration?
We
is-
don't have, that's one of the things I found was missing as I was working on this last night. I think it's in here, but it's not broken out. It's probably tucked into the resilience
Into
and
the resilience
adaptation.
and adaptation.
Correct, but we will work to call that out separately and can explain a little bit more why as we get into some of the more detailed
Okay.
parts that follow.
And the infrastructure improvements may or may not include, I understand how complicated it probably is to compile all this stuff like flood ready culverts and
Correct.
that's
Correct.
probably
So
not
they-
in there at this point.
Correct. Where those so if we're replacing something explicitly for resilience purposes, it's reflected in here. If we're replacing something because it's hit the end of its useful life,
Right, but the
And we're upsizing
replacement,
it.
right?
correct, that's not currently reflected in these totals.
Okay.
And then cross-cutting, that little gray wedge is community engagement, training, municipal planning, sort of the supporting pieces that allow us to know how to best prioritize and implement this work. This is another way to slice and dice that same $500 million. And it's thinking about whether it comes from state government or the federal government. It's thinking about whether it is ongoing or a one-time source of money. And in fact, in that large blue bar in the middle is disaster or event-based resources that we qualify for by virtue of having a federally declared disaster. And so what I hope you will take away from this is that very much of those resources is one-time or disaster-based money of that $500 million we are looking at in FY25. It's really the ongoing dollars and then those annual appropriations that would rightly be considered continuous or consistent funding for climate work. And on the side there have listed a bunch of different types of programs that we across state enterprises are currently implementing, some with state funds and then some with significant federal funds, and try to identify a little bit of information where possible about the source of those monies.
And if you added all three or all four together, they would get to your 500.
Correct. This is that same total for FY25, just a different way of organizing the information.
And the ongoing,
In terms of what's in there for ongoing funding?
yeah, the ongoing is, oh, I see, that's ongoing state.
Correct. And then ongoing federal, it would be the small blue bar beneath it. So
And
it's things
ongoing
like
federal.
the home weatherization assistance program that's funded with the fuel tax.
Gotcha.
Would be a
Roughly
great-
speaking, I'm sorry.
And then and then the annual, I'll look at, you know what, I'll print this out and my eyes are not hitting the colors. Yeah,
Sure.
Rep. Kleppner?
Rip towards.
Oh, Rep. Torres?
Quick question, clean water fund, is that from the property transfer tax?
The Clean Water Fund is property transfer tax, 6 points on the rooms and meals tax, and the unclaimed bottle deposits. The Clean Water Enhancement Grants is only a portion of that. So all told, coupled with money from the capital bill, the Clean Water Fund is about $50 million. The Clean Water Enhancement Grants is about $5 million, but that's really focused on things like dam removal, floodplain reconnection, and wetland restoration, which is why it feels germane to this one.
Rep. Kleppner?
So it looks like ongoing and annual combined are roughly 100 million in that order.
Yeah.
So
I think that's right. It's about 20%.
Okay.
And the one-time federal, that's huge.
Correct. And that's really the things like the Inflation Reduction Act money and the Inflation Infrastructure and Jobs Act money. It's spread out over a several year period, but it's not going to repeat.
Right. Okay, so IIJA, IRA,
ARPA.
ARPA.
Yep.
Okay.
So taking this into kind of the program level, and we'll start with weatherization, although have some similar information on vehicle electrification for your consideration. So this is first to give you a sense, there's a lot of different money that flows into weatherization work in the state. The bottom third of this chart is that those one-time federal funds, right? We were able to direct ARPA money to both low income and moderate income weatherization. There are dollars we are hopeful remain available under the Inflation Reduction Act for, again, weatherization work. And the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or IIJA, also had money available for weatherization. Up top in the purple and green sections of this chart is sort of our going funding around weatherization. Includes money that Efficiency Vermont and some of the other energy efficiency utilities are investing in that space, as well as that fuel surcharge that funds the low-income weatherization assistance program and the Office of Economic Opportunity at DCF. What's important to see here is currently we are spending on the order of $40 to $45 million a year. That is a fairly dramatic increase from where we were pre-COVID, when none of these one-time federal funding sources exist, but also that we are quickly approaching a funding cliff when it comes to weatherization, where we are likely to drop back to about half of our current levels, absent some change in funding programs dedicated to this work. This is just another way of displaying that same information. So the blue dots at the bottom sort of show our history with weatherization. In fact, our history stretches back to about 2000, and we've kind of moved along at this 1,000 to 2,000 homes per year pretty consistently. Over the last 20 or 25 years. And then you can see starting in 2024, we saw this pretty significant ramp up as we were able to deploy those federal funds. We don't have final numbers yet for 25 or 26, but based on the resources that are available to support that work and these average costs per household, we are able to project that we will be weatherizing about 4,000 homes this year and next year in total. We direct the majority, the lion's share of these resources to low income and moderate income households that are defined based on the percentage of average median income. And as you can see, it costs more to weatherize a low income home than it does for a moderate income or a market rate project, in large part because those folks don't have the means to necessarily contribute. Similarly, we can look at what's going on in the electric vehicle space. As of July of last year, there were more than 15,000 light-duty EVs registered in Vermont, and that trajectory is pretty incredible in terms of the rate of uptake. We also have just over 30 medium and heavy-duty vehicles on the road. I flag that knowing that there's a lot of interest currently in the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, and just let you know where we stand. To meet the Global Warming Solutions Act targets by 2030, our modeled projections is that we would need a 10-fold increase almost in the number of light-duty electric vehicles, and a 300-fold increase in the number of medium and heavy-duty truck vehicles. This is a challenging set of circumstances, but also, we have this exponential trajectory that we currently find ourselves on. One of the challenges I see is funding for this work. So in state fiscal year 20.
Sorry, Secretary Moore, I'm sorry.
Just curious, how many vehicles are in Vermont total? Do you know roughly? I don't know.
Andrea, are you able to?
536,000.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, that's you. Yeah. Okay.
I have it memorized for
I
the
just-
CAP presentation.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you. I just
Yeah.
needed the
I was looking at
context.
that to make sure.
That's good. One of the challenges in this space is the availability of funding. So in state fiscal year 25, we have upwards of $25 million available for different types of electric incentives, as well as the construction of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. These come from a variety of sources. Many of them are federal sources that have since been curtailed by the new administration. And the one source of funding we anticipate continuing into state fiscal year 26 are the EV fees that are currently being assessed by the Agency of Transportation. Those monies are dedicated to installing level 2 charging. That work is being coordinated through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, but obviously a significant reduction in the resources available.
So those are just the fees that we gather when people charge.
No, I don't think
There's
so.
something different.
Flat fee on registrations for EVs.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Is there an update to the NEVI money? I heard it went away and then it might have bounced back or,
My understanding is that it's paused currently. They haven't fully rescinded it, but we do not have access to it. Is that accurate, Andrew?
That's accurate, yeah. They rescinded approval of the plans, which allows them to give us the money. So our plans are no longer approved, so we no longer have access to the money until they come out with new guidance.
thank you.
and I think on these, I always like to, I think it's really important as a community that we understand with all of these categories, the difference between federal funds and state funds. Because federal funds are something that we can only try to respond to. State funds are something that we have influence over, we can direct, right? So on the EV funding, I'm not asking you to do this on the fly, but and on the weatherization funding, I'm going to be curious to know which are state funds.
Sure. And on the weatherization funding, I would say it's those top two sections minus the line that's the DOE, Department of Energy annual WAP funds, in that we are using our state fuel tax to leverage those federal monies.
Yeah.
But those top 5 lines, the efficiency utilities and then the state funds from the fuel tax are the state monies in that space.
So from EBT market rate through the
The
OEO.
first OEO, I
Through the
believe,
WAP.
Melissa,
Yes,
unless,
that's right.
okay.
Okay, and then the rest are federal funds.
Yep. Question, Chair.
Mhm.
On the fuel tax, we've got it level funded all those years. Are you expecting it not to go down as a revenue source just because the volume of sales could be going down?
Melissa, are you in a position to answer that question about whether we anticipate any changes in the
Somebody
weatherization
mentioned it in testimony,
assistance
I
program fuel tax revenue?
The state funds, I have not heard that's a function of fuel sales
Right.
in the state. So only to the extent that like a warmer winter means we sell less heating fuel and the tax revenue would go down correspondingly. But I haven't.
Even with electrification of heating kind of proceeding?
Well, that's another kind of big question is we're not seeing a huge impact
You're
on
not.
fuel sales right now due to electrification. We can talk more about electrification and heat pumps. The department is undertaking a study of heat pump usage right now, and it's really showing that folks are not offsetting the portion of their heating fuel that we would anticipate.
So these are pretty good numbers for us to count on.
At least I think in this period.
For now,
Yeah.
yes, and OEO could speak to the stability, the Office of Economic Opportunity of the WAP fund. I know you heard some of them yesterday, but I think for this time period, we don't see big fluctuations.
And then, Andrea, are you able to comment in terms of the state fiscal year 25? Am I correct in saying sort of the top, everything from the level 2 charging up is state monies, and then the DC fast charging is really the federal funds in that budget?
Yeah, all of our incentive programs, so those first 5 bullets are state funds. They are depleted now.
Yep.
And then, yes, the level 2 charging is a combination. Let's see. Yeah, some of that is federal funding. And then the flat fee, a portion of that is the flat fee, so that's state. And then the rest is federal.
I'm sorry, I think I got that wrong. So in FY 2025, 1, 2, 3, the top 5 things are state funds? NEVI,
No,
the top 5.
The incentive programs, the new PEV, Mileage Smart, Replace Your Ride, e-bikes, and Electrify Your Fleet are state funds. And then the level 2 charging is a combination. Oh, actually, you're right. That's state funds too.
Yeah, because
Sorry.
that's the new registration fee, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
correct. So it's really that $17.9 million bond, large one at the bottom there that is the federal money. in
That's
this.
the level 2 charging line is a combination of some monies from the 2024 T-bill state funds that were transferred from the Agency of Transportation to ACCD to continue their program along with the flat fee. So it's 2 different things all going to level 2 state funds.
Okay, thanks.
So there were proposals in H 289 that were intended to address some of these gaps, recognizing that this is really challenging in terms of our ability to continue to move these programs forward. The first was to direct roughly $15 million of the revenues being collected by the energy efficiency utilities to weatherization, heat pump deployment, and an energy navigator program that's been established at the community action agencies that helps connect low-income Vermonters with these programs to ensure they're able to take full advantage of the tools that exist. And then the other piece of that was reallocating or taking some of the RGGI proceeds, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We are the beneficiary when they auction off allowances each quarter. The allowances have been selling at a higher price than had been anticipated in our budget. So there's some money on the bottom line of the RGGI account, which is called TEPF. And the proposal was to take money in excess of $6 million, recognizing those RGGI proceeds are funding weatherization work through Efficiency Vermont. But if there is headroom in that account to direct those over to AOT for vehicle electrification. So would be continuing those top 5 bullets there would be a potential funding source for continuing that work. And just want to show kind of the dramatic increase we are anticipating over the next 25 years in terms of electric consumption. This is a chart in gigawatt hours that came out of work we did in developing the initial climate action plan. We call this the Pathways Report. So it's looking at its modeled results about what we expect going into the future. And essentially it predicts our energy consumption, electricity consumption will double between 2018 and 2050. And what you can see on this chart is that is driven by increases in electricity demand for transportation. And so just flagging that initiatives that increase the cost of electricity are sort of also run counter to our push to encourage folks to switch to home-based and vehicle and sources that rely on electricity by sending a price signal that works against some of the value proposition that electricity currently provides. So the next component of our climate work is around sequestration. And we know that achieving our long-term climate goals requires both reducing emissions, the kinds of practices we've just talked about, as well as measures to enhance carbon sequestration. And that's things like ensuring our forest lands remain forests, implementing enhanced best management practices or BMPs on our agricultural lands, and looking for opportunities for tree planting and reforestation. This is a kind of busy graph, but what I'm hoping you will take away from it is blue is what we would call in some ways the business as usual case. No, I'm messing that. No, I'm not messing that up. This is the business as usual case. This is where we believe we are headed with policies that are currently on the books in Vermont. The black dashed line shows what the Global Warming Solutions Act requires. The purple line at the bottom shows how much carbon we are able to sequester each year. And that is a negative number and it's getting smaller. So it means we are projected to sequester less carbon each year under current policies. And then the green is what happens if you mush the blue line and purple line together. Excuse me, the green line is what happens if you mush the Global Warming Solutions Act line and the purple line together. Oh, okay. It's a lot of what I hope you take away from this is the importance of not just doing the emissions reduction work, but we also need to have eyes on the practices that are important for carbon sequestration on our landscape. Our forests and our farmlands are incredible climate assets. And I worry sometimes they sort of take a back seat to the focus on greenhouse gas emissions.
So I don't understand the purple line. Sorry.
The purple line is looking at how much carbon we are sequestering. So that stands for land use, land what, I don't even know what all the LULU.
That use land cover. I don't actually know what the
Extra
Why is it
U.
going up?
extra use.
I thought you said we're gonna be sequestering less.
It's
We are.
actually negative.
It's a negative number, so it's going from, right now, we're sequestering on the, somewhere near 6, I think if these are.
Oh, I see, because it's
millions.
below 0.
Correct, and so over time,
Tons out of the atmosphere.
correct,
So we're
and
gonna
by
go down to
2050, it'll be
One ton
4,
out of the atmosphere,
Yeah.
or 6 million tons or whatever.
I think a million metric tons, yeah.
Yeah, 6 million.
Yeah, and I think very important that we have scientifically reliable ways of measuring sequestration, which I feel like we don't have right now.
So yeah, that's
Rex, Bailey? Yeah.
actually my question. If you could just walk us through the modeling for that,
In terms of how we're approaching it,
how that has, so it says it's modeled, who modeled it? What is that?
yeah,
So if for in the pathways report, the first time we did a carbon budget, which we hired out externally, which was done through UVM in large part. And that carbon budget looked at a comprehensive approach to measuring sequestration and storage across ag land, all land use land covers. So ag land, wetlands, forest land. We on an annual basis do the forest component of that, and that is now handled through the UVM monitoring cooperative through Dr. Ali Kasiba, who was at our agency as a climate change forester, went there to UVM. So we update on an annual basis the forestry sector of that, but we have not maintained an application of a whole picture of sort of sequestration, storage, and loss over time with respect to thinking about how we account for ag lands and wetlands. And we've been talking about how to do that on a periodic basis. I would say that Dr. Ali Kasiba, who does the forestry component, has a very robust methodology that she uses with respect to forestry sequestration and storage. Yes, could it be improved if we were going to use it as a number against of which we were measuring our targets? But it has been continually improving, and that's something that we've been working with her office on pretty closely to make sure. And we pull that into, right now, the LULUCF sector is in the greenhouse gas inventory as an additional sort of information on sequestration and storage. It's just not counted on the gross emission ledger side of the inventory. So I want to make sure I get that right. Can you go back to the previous slide? Mm-hmm. So the purple is the Lulu CF. Okay. And that is is drawn on work that UVM did for the pathways, but it is a sector that we update every year in the greenhouse gas inventory. And it's updated just with forest. Yes. And so what we're looking at here is a slide where we have included mention of agriculture, but we're not actually measuring that. We did for this particular one in a copy because it was done as a moment in time and a projection. We included a robust analysis of all the sectors in the LULUCF, but this was for the 2021 climate action plan. Okay, so I'm confused, Madam Chair. And so I really need to slow this down and make sure I understand what is on the slide, because I'm also noting we don't really have dates or things on here. So I want to make sure I really understand what we're looking at here. When this data is from and what it includes. So take me line by line.
the dates are in the middle, which is a little confusing, but it's because
The dates of measure, it's not the dates of the, okay. So it's an annual measurement.
correct. It's an annual projection, I would say, right?
Yes.
Because it's forward looking.
Mhm.
This is 2022 through 2050. The blue line is what we would refer to as the business as usual case. So this reflects policies that are on the books, revenue sources like the fuel tax that are available to help support weatherization and what the benefits are. So we're showing if we did nothing else for climate action, we expect our greenhouse gas emissions to decline over time.
Mhm.
The line at the bottom, the purple line, is how much carbon we are able to sequester each year.
And it was calculated for the year and then projected forward. So the analysis was done in 2022
And
for that year comprehensively and then projected forward. And that was the last year of our greenhouse gas inventory that we published.
So the first year on there is 2022, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so that first year is a measurement that UVM did of all sectors.
Yes. It's from our carbon budget. So it was a number of, UVM was the main contractor. Yes.
And it's still a modeled number, right? We're not able to measure comprehensively carbon sequestration, but we have good information on land use and land cover. We have good information on forest stand age. We have information on agricultural best management practices. So it is a data informed number, but it is not none of these are direct measurements.
I think I've accept the slide.
Could I ask you a question, Chair?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just thinking of all our work on the 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 bill. Would that show up here?
Yeah,
as policy?
I have a slide on that coming.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and then this is work Dr. Katsiba is helping with, and it's just tracking forest loss over time. Vermont is losing forest land. Sometimes struggle with the scale, right? Because that scale is 4.4 to 4.7 million acres of forest cover, and we're losing about 5,000 to 5,500 acres a year. So the decline is important, but it might be misleading based on how that graph looks.
Reducing that forest to what? Just development in general?
Yes, yeah, conversion.
And down in my neck of the woods, we're surrounded by large tracts of national forest.
Yeah.
How do we work with Forest Service on? I mean, I guess that's for another day, maybe. But I mean, you're including all that
Correct.
in these numbers, I assume, right?
Correct. And when we talk about 30 by 30, it'll show up there too. Right there. So Act 59 of 2023 asked ANR to work in collaboration with the Vermont Housing Conservation Board to first develop an inventory of conserved lands in Vermont, and then propose a conservation plan that will support attaining 30 by 30 conservation and actually 50 by 50 conservation. So what we found in the inventory report that was submitted this past fall is that about 27% of Vermont's landscape is permanently conserved. This includes forest lands and farmlands. About 370,000 acres of that 1.6 million is with ANR. So this is things like state forests and wildlife management areas and state parks. We also know that there's about 2.4 million acres of working lands that are enrolled in the state's use value appraisal program. That includes forest lands as well as farmlands. There is overlap between the 1.58 million of permanently conserved and the 2.4 million of lands enrolled in the UVA program. I didn't have that, or I couldn't put my fingers on that number as I was building this presentation, but happy to follow up with that number if helpful. Reaching that 30 by 30 requirement would require an additional 185,000 acres of conservation, which works out to something like 30,000 acres, I think, a year for each of the next 5 years. There's a really significant price tag associated with that work. Our typical price for a conserved acre varies, but it's somewhere between $1,000 and $4,000 an acre. And it really varies considerably, not just based on location, but also sort of what the future potential of those lands are.
Yeah, Rep Southworth.
Is this inclusive of lands in the current use program?
The 2.4 million is,
Okay, so that is included in the percentage for the 30 by 30 and 50 by 50.
so 30 by 30, the directive was permanently conserved lands. So lands that are only enrolled in UVA and don't have another conservation protection are not counted in that 1.58 million. in looking to 50 by 50, there was sort of an ask made of ANR and VHCB about whether or not use value land should count towards that total. If we were to count all of the lands enrolled in the use value appraisal system, we would already be at 50% land conservation.
So a follow-up to that is, this is what I've heard. I don't know if this is true. If someone is in current use, they drop out of current use, is there still technically a lien on that land? So that when it's sold, that lien still follows that land? And if it does, a little further, would that be considered permanently conserved?
I believe there is a process where a landowner pays a tax penalty if they withdraw their land from current use. And I believe once they have paid that penalty, there is not a lien that travels with the property. So it would no longer be considered enrolled in the
Right, but
program.
if their 10-year plan drops off,
Yep.
they don't re-up in the current use.
Oh,
That's where I'm trying to get at.
I don't know the answer to that question, but certainly have people at ANR that I can ask and get
Yeah,
back
I'd
to you on.
appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Happy
How do
to.
you calculate the cost per acre of conservation? If I own a farm and I put it into easement with the Nature Conservancy, where are you guys getting these numbers?
From those transactions. So, we enter into conservation projects regularly, as well as partners enter into conservation projects. And so this is just a sort of I would say an aggregated list of all of our collective experience, in purchasing those either permanent easements or in fee, where we own the land outright.
Thanks.
So just where the funding comes from to continue this conservation and sequestration work. The money that is really available for forest land conservation comes from a number of sources, but the three most significant in our portfolio are the Land and Water Conservation Fund and Forest Legacy Fund, which are both federal sources, as well as funding through VHCB. VHCB has an annual conservation budget that generally runs in the $6 to $8 million range. About a third of that is typically directed towards forest land conservation, and the balance goes towards ag land conservation. In addition, there are a lot of agricultural management practices that are being funded that help improve soil quality and manure management, both of which have important climate benefits. Those dollars come from state clean water funds, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And recently, the Lake Champlain Basin Program has been a really important contributor of funding to this work. And on average, right now, our investments in those agricultural management practices are on the order of $30 million a year. The chart on the right-hand side of the screen, I pulled out of our most recent clean water performance report. So this is something we put together annually, but gives you a sense of the significant growth in acres of agricultural lands that are being treated with one or more conservation practices each year over the last 10 years. And then that sort of final bucket of climate work is around resilience and adaptation. We sometimes refer to this as the spaghetti map. This was initiated by the folks in our rivers management program, and sort of sketched in the footprint, if you would, of different federally declared disasters in Vermont. I think the sort of important points are there have been a significant number of them over the last 14 years since Tropical Storm Irene. They've been all over the state. And in response, or as a result of those disasters, Vermont has received more than $500,000 in federal post-disaster assistance. Those monies serve two purposes. One is to build back, and then the other is to help us reduce future hazards. So through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. There are also a number of state programs that help improve resilience, some of which come through our clean water fund, some of which are in our T-bill. And we have also created a set of incentives around municipal zoning to encourage our local partners in helping us do this important work of building resilience.
Are the regions shown on the map, the disaster declaration regions?
Yeah, okay, are areas where those disasters occurred.
2011 is the entire state.
Pretty much, yeah. And 2019 is a pretty big portion of the state. This doesn't have 2023 or 2024 on it, but I think the visual to me is striking in that it shows that there are disasters almost every year. Some of them are very small and incredibly impactful, not unlike the storms we saw in the summer of 2024. Some of them are much more widespread, like the flooding experienced in 2023 or during Tropical Storm Irene. And then just a little bit about some of the challenges in the resilience and adaptation space. I think we have continued to wrestle with the fact that we have these quantitative or numeric targets for greenhouse gas emissions reductions that gives us something very clear to aim at, and we don't have the same sort of target for adaptation. In addition, a lot of the funding for this work tends to be event-based. We receive a modest allotment of hazard mitigation funds, or at least we have historically, through FEMA every year to do proactive work, but we inevitably see a surge in that funding immediately following a federally declared disaster. I believe in a typical year, we see about $2 to $3 million worth of hazard mitigation grants. And for example, following the 2023 floods, we anticipate receiving something like $20 million in hazard mitigation grants. So they give us, we are, I guess, given a percentage of the total damage that occurred as hazard mitigation money following a federally declared disaster event. Our initial climate action plan included numerous recommendations around resilience, but the program design efforts is what I would term it. Things like thinking about a clean heat standard or a cap and invest framework are really focused on greenhouse gas emissions and not in this resilience and adaptation space, which is part of what led the governor and the treasurer to kick off the work around a resilience implementation strategy last January. It's intended to serve as a companion to the climate action plan. It is focused on the work of state government in this space into these 5 buckets. This work is well underway, and we are on track to have the plan or the strategy available with the release of the updated climate action plan on July 1st. We are partnering with the Treasurer's Office, who will help us put some cost numbers to some of this resilience work that may lag a little bit behind the prioritized strategies in the plan. But we just had a large public engagement meeting at the end of last month. The team is going through all of the input they've received, but we have actually identified about 300 different programs within state government that have intersection with improving landscape level resilience in Vermont. And so we're looking at how to prioritize that work, make sure that resilience is given full weight, and how we put out our funding through those efforts, and then identify gaps and work with the Treasurer's Office on strategies to fill them.
So I've got some thoughts on this slide because it's I think a really important one. I thought, did you just say the resilience implementation strategy? I know we took some great testimony on that, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. And it sounds like I thought that when it was released this summer, it was going to include very specific thoughts on what each project was going to cost and where the money was going to come from, and a prioritization of those projects so that it was all together. Because I know that had been one of your main critiques of the climate action plan. Did you say that that's not happening at the same time now?
Well, I think we may need a little bit more time. Honestly, I don't know that, like, I did not anticipate in kicking this off that we would identify quite as many different ongoing efforts within state government as we have. The fact that there are 300 different programs that have connections with resilience is a little daunting. We also received an incredible amount of input and feedback at our stakeholder session at the end of March. Folks are working through all of that input right now. I believe we'll be in a position to have that list of priorities by July 1st, but I don't think we'll have as much time as the treasurer would like to be able to cost and make suggestions around funding sources by July 1st. But I believe that work could be completed by early this fall.
And the one thing we also talked about in connection with the resilience implementation strategy was how are you going to measure progress?
So I will say a few words and then pitch it to Jane, but we are one of the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act was for the agency to build something we're calling the MAP tool, Measuring and Assessing Progress tool. And this tool will have metrics in it related not only to greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but also resilience and adaptation and public engagement. And I don't know, Jane, if you want to add to that or just maybe even a little bit about timing on that work.
Yeah, so the map tool phase 1 will be done May 15th of this year, which
That's right.
which
It's all coming
includes
back to me now.
which
Okay.
includes a recommendation on the infrastructure needs to move that work forward. So this has really been about what are the metrics, especially in the space of resilience and adaptation, to complement the metrics we use in the mitigation space. So we have a draft report on the map tool right now that our staff is reviewing and working on with the contractor for them to iterate on. We have a data governance team that we'll present it to, and then we look to finalize that by mid-May. And we're hoping to tie that very closely, especially with the programs and projects that come out of the resilience implementation strategy, so we can direct Vermonters to see progress in that space through that tool.
And then my final thing, then I know you've got your hand up too. I know this is just a slide, but I just want to reflect a little bit on your second bullet point. Because I just think how we talk about this work is so important. And when I read your bullet point saying that program design efforts like Clean Heat and Cap and Invest have focused on GHG emissions, what I feel it's important to elaborate on is that it sounds as though focusing on greenhouse gas emissions is somehow unrelated to resilience. And I see it in exactly the opposite way, which is that greenhouse gas emissions are the metric by which we measure progress. So when we see greenhouse gas emissions going down, it's a metric we use to measure progress. But what that progress really means, what we're actually accomplishing in order to achieve that progress, is helping Vermonters weatherize their homes and helping folks get into more fuel efficient vehicles. And so the actual work happens, one person in one household at a time. And that is the definition of climate resilience. They're not two different things. And, for all of their complexities, Clean Heat and Cap Invest are both proposed ways of raising money to help actual people be able to afford to make that change. And so I just don't like the framing of it as two separate things, or as if, greenhouse gas emissions reductions are of course important in and of themselves because that helps the environment, that slows global warming. Those are important, but I think that we sell our work short when we don't reflect upon the fact that it's all about resilience.
Yes, I think some of it's the way we use the word resilience in at least our own internal conversations around climate. This is resilience to climate hazards. And so really focused on things like flooding, and to lesser degrees, things like vector-borne illnesses and heat and the need for cooling centers and wildland fire risks. And so it's how we the impacts of climate change are going to continue to be felt in Vermont, regardless of whether or not we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And appreciating your point that many of those greenhouse gas emissions reduction efforts help people become more resilient to whether it's volatile fuel prices or having a home that's more comfortable to be in through a variety of weather conditions. But really, the conversation around resilience here is dealing with directly with those climate hazards.
Yeah, I hear you and I understand. I think it's important when we talk about climate work to understand why we're doing it. And it's to help Vermonters in energy transition. So sorry,
And maybe just one reflection there is I think we would have a very different set of investment priorities if we were being driven by resilience and adaptation than if we were being driven by greenhouse gas emissions reductions. It's not to say we wouldn't do any of the greenhouse gas emissions reduction work, but I think we would be seizing those opportunities where people are making a switch anyways to retire an internal combustion engine vehicle and pick an EV. Their furnace is on its last legs and it's time to look at a new home heat system. In order to achieve the greenhouse gas emissions reduction requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act, we have to go way, way beyond that. And to me, that's where this starts to move away from resilience because it's much more heavily weighted towards the emissions reductions than some of the co-benefits associated with that work.
yeah, and I guess I would argue that if we're only responding to impacts instead of trying to get ahead, we're falling behind.
I agree.
Rep. Sibilia?
Yeah, of course, I have so much to say here, but I would include adaptation as being a key part of resilience and the emissions reduction being a key part of adapting to energy transition. That is not where I want to go with this. You know, I'm thrilled that the administration has decided to move forward in bringing something in terms of a resilience strategy. I think it's important. It's welcome. One of the things that I'm really concerned about right in this moment is what's happening federally. And we tend to be particularly reliant on federal funding for all of our solutions and really averse to having to raise funding. So that's a concern for me. But you know, in the near term, bringing these strategies forward, what are you presuming? Are you modeling a reduction in federal support over the next 4 years? Because that seems incredibly important. And if we're not, I think actually it would be good for us to know.
Yeah, I would say this is really focused on state government systems and the work that we have direct control over, as opposed to anticipating changes at the federal level. I appreciate your concern. I think in moments of crisis, the force multiplier that the federal government is able to provide is unbelievably important, whether that's FEMA showing up after a flood event, or frankly, in my space, EPA showing up when we have a particularly tricky contaminated site that we don't know how to deal with. And I think not knowing what capacity and capabilities our federal partners will have is something we are absolutely paying attention to. And I think the answer is we don't know yet. And it's hard to plan around that uncertainty other than currently understanding the resources we've relied on in those moments of crisis are less likely to be there than they have been historically.
And so as you're building this strategy and bringing this information forward for us, will you be highlighting all of those programs that rely on federal funding?
Yeah, I believe that is the way we've organized this information, both in the funding portfolio work that I shared earlier, as well as what we're doing around the resilience implementation strategy to show where there are those important connections between work we're leading on the ground that relies on federal dollars.
Yeah, two comments. One, the climate spending report that Secretary relied on to pull together a lot of this information today. Our interagency advisory board to the climate office met on Monday, and wanted to acknowledge, the uncertainty around the federal funding. And we as a board, and pointing to Melissa and Andrea, because they were both integral in speaking to their respective roles in managing federal funds, agreed that we would work to update the spreadsheet linked in that report to acknowledge which ones had most certainty going forward, understanding it is an uncertain time of what is really going to transpire with federal funds. We did want to update it to signal which ones were, as Melissa has done good work on, our conditional awards, most likely the most vulnerable and moving forward at this point now, and which ones are the most certain to proceed. So that's work our office is going to do over the next few weeks to update the climate spending report to have a picture of the federal transition, and that looks at both mitigation funds and resilience and adaptation funds. And then second, just thinking about mitigation in particular, the business as usual model, we are in the throes of finalizing an update for this climate action plan. And we've decided to proceed with 2 business as usual models for this climate action plan, understanding that there's a business as usual, as we know programs are within the put in place last 1 to 2 years, and a pessimistic worst case scenario around significant changes between. And so we'll have a bounds of a business that instead of, it should always be a bounds because it's not, it's a model. As Secretary always says, all models are wrong, some are useful. But the business as usual model, we'll have 2, and we'll expect to have some reasonable bounds of confidence on where we will fall. And so, yes.
I have one more. Thank you. That's helpful. And actually, that's great to hear that that's happening. One more question for you, Secretary Moore, about who would be able to help us understand the planning that the administration is doing in the near term around the potential for disaster without appropriate or expected federal assistance. I mean, as you probably know, Washington State has been denied disaster declaration. North Carolina, rural North Carolina, which has been devastated, has been denied an extension on their FEMA funding. And so that feels really urgent and present. So who in the administration could tell us about what planning we're doing in the event that we are faced with a disaster this summer?
Yeah, the work is led out of Vermont Emergency Management, so I would suggest the Department of Public Safety and Commissioner Morrison or Director Foreign of VEM would be the right people to talk about.
And just a couple related questions. These are easy. Will we be able to see when the spending report is updated to include that information about federal?
We'll be happy to share it with the committee.
That'd be great. And have you been into approps yet? I know House Appropriations is taking, I think, really systematic testimony from state agencies about this exact topic. Have you guys gone yet?
We have not been scheduled yet.
Okay. Yeah, for Bailey.
Could you give me an estimate on the cost to create the MAC tool and how soon is it going to be out?
Jane?
Yeah, the cost, yeah. So the phase 1 was a $350,000 contract that will be complete by May 15th. And then we have roughly $425,000 as carry forward money right now, anticipated to be used to build the infrastructure. We don't know if that is too much or too little yet, but that's roughly what we have. So $775,000 in total is the funding we've had to put towards the development of the tool. I expect it to be online by the end of next fiscal year.
The end of next year.
I think I have just one more slide. So just summarizing, we have, as a state, made really significant investments in climate action over the last 5 years, both in our own dollars as well as how we've directed federal funds. The ARPA money in particular could have gone to a lot of places, and about 200 million of it did go into climate action. About 2/3 of those invested dollars have been in greenhouse gas mitigation, whereas the balance has gone into adaptation and resilience efforts. It's helped drive some important growth in workforce capacity and practice uptake. Weatherization is a great example of that, where we've doubled the number of units we are currently able to weatherize. As we've talked about, the majority of that funding, both at the federal and state level, has been one-time or limited duration money. And there is a real risk of losing capacity that we've worked so hard to build over absent some sort of sustained investment. And just a reflection on the overall successful implementation of the Global Warming Solutions Act requires these significant sustained resources. I think there are parallels to some of what we see in the water infrastructure space. About 6 years ago, then Commissioner Walk and I had estimated about $2 billion worth of need over the next 20 years in water infrastructure. With the benefit of ARPA and the bipartisan infrastructure law, we are keeping pace in this moment in time, this 5-year window. And then our challenge becomes how we sustain that effort as those federal funds tail off to fully fund the work. I think we face a similar challenge here, where we've done some incredible projects over the last several years by prioritizing both climate action and water infrastructure and how we've invested federal funds. But as those funds wind down, we need to look to what comes.
On the 1 billion, I'm just thinking again to conservation and forest conservation. It plays both a mitigation and a resilience role, right? So that 1,000 to 4,000 per acre, I guess is this tool and this kind of modeling that you're doing going to account for those types of wearing two hats kind of strategies?
Some of the challenge of conservation is it typically doesn't change the land use that already exists on the ground. There's some exceptions to that. For example, our Fish and Wildlife Department is running a pretty extensive wetland restoration initiative that wears two hats of clean water and resilience. It's about, I think over the last several years, it's a couple thousand acres of wetlands we have conserved and are in the process of restoring from agricultural lands. So those are a land use change. A lot of the work we do through the Forest Legacy Program and through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, however, is sort of maintaining a particularly valuable resource as opposed to restoring it. And so it doesn't tend to show up the same way. Even though those lands are conserved, it's conserving the status quo, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Rep Morrow and then Bailey.
Let's circle back to my national forest question. You know, how aligned are people managing our national forests with what your efforts are regarding resilience and adaptation?
Yeah, we have an incredibly strong partnership with the Green Mountain National Forest. John Sinclair, who manages that, as well as the Finger Lakes District, and is in regular coordination and communication with our team in Forest and Parks in particular, but also our Fish and Wildlife Department, and just really value their partnership in thinking about how we manage state and federal lands with a continuity that makes sense to Vermonters on the ground.
Good to hear.
What about though in that context? I know that the Trump administration is trying to expand logging on national forest land. Any way of predicting how that might impact Vermont or?
Not specifically, although we've done work to know that there is room to take more timber sustainably off of our state forests as well as federal forest lands. Currently, if my recollection is correct, for every unit of biomass we are removing from our forests, 3 are being grown each year. So we're always gaining biomass. It's not always the right kind of biomass. Like there's some real need for management practices. So I think a lot of the potential effect of that depends on how it's implemented and done in a thoughtful way, consistent with good forest management practices. We believe there is capacity for additional timber harvest here, although don't know that the feds have any specific plans in the Green Mountain National Forest right now.
Okay. Rep Bailey?
Yeah, just going back to, you talked about, and I'm not sure whether it's FEMA money or there was mentioned a $3 million chunk of money. How much of that actually went and actually get dispersed in projects actually built at the local town level? Or
see if I can find the number you're talking about, just so I can answer your question appropriately. Sure. Is it one of these?
Well, I'm not sure. I just heard you say something about $3 million and you received it and I thought it was for projects for maybe events or maybe I didn't hear it right, but I'm just trying to figure out of that three, how much, was taken in admin and actually.
Oh, you mean like the hazard mitigation grant program?
Yeah, I guess that's what.
Generally, my understanding is all of that is passed through to projects on the ground, that our staff are paid for at Vermont Emergency Management, separately. And so we are able to push all of those dollars out into direct implementation.
And just, can you give me an example of what might have been done?
Sure. There's a whole range of projects. Buyouts is probably the thing that gets the most attention. So properties that have experienced repeated flood damage and or more recently, we have worked with FEMA on buyouts for properties that are at risk around landslides because we've had significant landslide activity develop over the last several years. Hazard mitigation grants, though, have also been used in certain instances to do some floodplain restoration work, as well as, I think, some targeted dam removal work. So it's a variety of projects, and they have a ranking process to ensure they're putting them into the best projects that are brought forward for funding.
Thank you.
Right.
I will just add that my family removed a dam for $0, except the cost of the chainsaw blade that my dingbat brother thought was a good idea to cut underwater with a chainsaw and hit a rock.
Yikes.
But it was
It's not necessarily our recommended strategy,
but a very inexpensive dam removal and restoration project.
All right. Thank you